Having a time and resource-intensive garden makes creating a stable and secure source of food almost impossible. A healthy garden is really not limited to just making sure you've got the right composition of plants or even just about creating good soil, although those are very important. It's more about creating a stable and secure supply chain for food, energy, water, shelter, and waste, and building resilience into every single component of your system. There have been a ton of incredibly valuable lessons that I've learned throughout my 50 years of organic gardening, and particularly on this property. In this video, I'm going to illustrate and share with you a number of things to avoid, lots of tips, when creating your resilient landscape. Don't underestimate the importance of a secure water supply. Water is life, yet it goes without saying that almost everyone takes their water supply for granted, especially if you live in an urban environment, as I do. The fact is that your ability to nurture food resilience absolutely depends on your access to water. So it makes sense that this should become a real priority for you. In natural environments, the top of the watershed may be an alpine glacier, but in my context, it's my roof. Knowing that my food supply depends on the availability of water, I do everything I possibly can do to capture or direct every drop of rain that falls on my structures so that this incredibly valuable resource is put to productive use on my property. In some cases, we're capturing and storing water so we can direct it where and when it's needed. And in other cases, we are employing strategies that direct that water right into the landscape. We currently have approximately 5,500 gallons of water storage capacity on our property already in place. So this saves us a lot of money too and helps us to have a storage of water in case of emergencies. So one of the ways in which we're capturing water on our property and holding it for times when we may have dry periods, as we're doing now, is we've got 4 1,000-liter IBC totes here that are connected together that allow us to harvest a ton of rainwater off of our flat-roofed house. In addition to that, we are also able to, when these are full or when we don't want them to fill, we've actually arranged this wonderful system with a diverter that allows the water to actually move down through a non-perforated piece of weeping tile as it crosses underneath our pathway, and then it becomes perforated and moves directly into the garden landscape. So that's one way in which we're using our rainwater capture in 2 different ways. Also, our overflow off of this system gets to go directly into the forest garden system behind me. Regarding our structures capturing water, of course, we've got our house and our garages, but we've also got rainwater capture off of our tool shed behind us, which goes into this system. We've actually got a wood shed, which also captures rainwater, and a large pergola with a slanted corrugated roof that actually takes that rainwater and puts it directly into the forest garden system at the back of the property. So you can see that by having various strategies for utilizing this valuable rainwater resource, it gives us a lot more resilience. So we've got the capture, and then we've got how do we direct it directly into the landscape so that we're hydrating that soil for the long term. Don't overlook the importance of incorporating pollinator supportive plants into your design. There may be a tendency for some folks to really laser beam their focus on using every available square inch of their property only for intensive food production, whether that's for annual vegetables or for food forests, and skipping over the importance of supporting those important populations of pollinators and other beneficial insects. This is a big mistake, and one that will ultimately spiral your growing systems into decline. The decision to incorporate flowering plants into your landscape is not driven necessarily by aesthetics, but rather by an informed and mindful strategy for nurturing overall ecosystem health. In addition to pollinator support, planting the bees, as we like to say, we need to consider the myriad of other beneficial insects that carry out very important pest control services in our ecosystems, ones that help maintain and balance healthy populations of diverse insect and larval populations. If you can design in the checks and balances by bringing in the local talent, you don't have to become the intervener, saving you time, energy, and resources. That doesn't mean, however, that our pollinator support systems are not beautiful. If you look behind me, you can see that I've basically ringed my main vegetable production garden here with all kinds of pollinator supportive species, and not just pollinator species, but ones that attract those beneficial insects that are really important to keep some of those other insect entities at bay, to keep them in checks and balance. So for example, behind me I've got a few dill plants. I've also got small flowering cilantro. These small flowers are absolutely fantastic at attracting tiny little parasitic wasps that are very, very great predators for a lot of the problem garden, quote unquote, pests that many folks find in their gardens. So this is a wonderful way to bring in the pest control. So we talked about planting the bees, now we're planting all the beneficial insects that create a ton more diversity in our systems and allow us to keep all of these problems at bay. One of the beautiful things about building a resilient landscape is that it's ever changing, it's ever dynamic, and there's always interesting things going on in our landscape. So for example, this year in this row here where you see all these sunflowers, I planted a row of very tall peas. Normally I don't see any issues with predators in my growing system here, but my neighbor used to feed the sparrows. She stopped feeding the birds. Now they were in my garden this year eating all of my pea shoots. And I was really concerned that I was not going to get a ton of production off of my peas, but I thought, oh, that's fine, it's just an ebb and flow of life. And then suddenly I started to see in this row sunflowers coming up, and cilantro coming up, and pole beans coming up. And what was really interesting to me is I didn't plant any of those things. It was the birds and the squirrels that planted this entire row of beautiful sunflowers, which are interspersed with the peas, which are now producing. There's cilantro in here, there's dill back here, spinach growing. I didn't plant any of those things. So I think it's really marvelous when we can allow the patterns that happen seasonally to express themselves in our gardens. We get to live, a wonderful life of wonder in the garden, and we get to embrace all of the diversity that this ecosystem can support. Don't ignore the wisdom of natural patterns. Natural systems are embedded with deep layers of genius and functionality, honestly beyond our ability to comprehend. And although we may not understand the actual intricacies of what's going on, we can glean a lot by observing natural patterns. We can ask ourselves, what makes this ecosystem thrive? How is it able to function without intervention? What kinds of interactions are occurring here? What forms of energy, sunlight, wind, water, wildlife, etc., are moving through this system? When we observe these systems, we can recognize that they are self-regulating, self-sustaining, stable but never static, insanely interactive, and highly resilient. We can observe that this is a function of diversity, niching, and so on, but instead of ignoring these patterns, why don't we emulate them in the way that we cycle nutrients, we use mulch, we space our plants, we bring in diversity. So this is necessary in order for our system to be anti-fragile, so we can get the dynamism and functionality of a natural ecosystem in our own designed systems. For example, in this forest garden plant guild, which is an assemblage of supportive plant species, for this one apple tree, we have a number of plants performing various functions that are important to the ecosystem health of this guild. So we have dynamic accumulators, which are plants which really are fantastic at cycling nutrients, such as rhubarb. We've got nitrogen fixing plants in here like globe carigana and lupins and clovers, which are really fantastic at, again, cycling that nitrogen, which is all important, obviously. We've got plants that are performing not only pollinator services, but also ground cover services. Many of these are edible or medicinal. And for example, this plant, catmint, I found probably already 8 or 9 functions for that one plant in this ecosystem. So those are just a few very, very short examples of how these plants are all here to support one another, provide services for the health of the entire ecosystem. So this is a key strategy, not only in areas in which we're assembling plant species together, but when we look at various other elements on a resilient property, such as, how do we connect a chicken coop and a pond? How do we connect the pond to the garden? How do we connect the gardening with the composting? And then how do we create connections between all of those various elements instead of isolating them and not connecting? So as I mentioned, the reason this ecosystem works and the reason natural ecosystems are so high functioning and so incredibly resilient is due to this ability of creating multiple matrices of connections. So if we mimic that pattern in our designs, whether it be a plant grouping or our other elements on our property, we're going to build a very elastic, resilient, anti-fragile system. Another extremely important consideration when designing a resilient property is to be very careful to avoid disrupting or breaking the nutrient cycle on your property. This is a very key point when it comes to maintaining levels of fertility and also allowing the ecosystem to take care of its own needs. So one of the brilliant aspects of natural ecosystems is their ability to be self-supportive. In other words, the needs of the system are met from within the system itself. So emulating that through our nutrient cycle is a key strategy for success. So for example, in my forest garden system, which basically surrounds the perimeter of this area and my entire front yard, the way that I'm supporting my nutrient cycle, number one, is to make sure that my soil is covered and mulched heavily. So that allows this constant input of organic matter into my system through the activity of soil microbes, but it also allows me to utilize the clippings, plant clippings, any kind of prunings off of woody perennials. They never leave the system. They do not go to my composting system. They are cut into pieces and laid in place on the forest floor. This allows these nutrients, very important fertility, to be reinvested back into the system. So not only am I supporting the health and dynamism and vibrancy of my man-made ecosystem, but I'm also saving myself a ton of time not needing to bring in inputs to maintain levels of fertility. So for example, in this forest garden area behind me where we've got plenty of woody perennial trees and shrubs, we also have a lot of herbaceous perennials. Now all of these contribute to the mulch layer in this forest garden, which is really, really important. So if you look down here, you can see there's quite a bit of detritus that we've laid down on the forest floor here. Now that does a number of things for us. Not only does it provide an ongoing source of carbon for our very important soil microbes, it also acts to help protect our soil moisture, so make sure that we've got a good soil sponge and that we can maintain that. So the lovely thing about having herbaceous perennials, such as this is a white veronica that we use for the pollinators, is that at the end of the season I can cut these back fairly significantly and lay this material right down on the forest floor. I've also got comfrey behind each of my fruit trees here that I can chop and drop and lay down in this system so that we can keep those nutrients cycling very, very efficiently through this system. So it's a win-win all the way. I don't have to take this material to the compost. I can leave it right here in place to do its magnificent job. For our annual systems, however, such as our annual vegetable gardens, we rely very strongly on our composting system as a way to cycle those nutrients back into the system. It's not the same as a perennial system, which is a lot more carbon intense. In our annual vegetable gardens, we're looking at a lot of nitrogen-rich materials. So we're not going to be doing what we call chop and drop necessarily in our gardens, because we definitely don't want those nutrients to be held in the plant material. We'd rather see those get into the soil. So the best way to do that is actually through composting. So we've got 4 fantastic composting bins here in our back alley, and we produce some really beautiful, high quality, oh, smells so good, compost. You can see that there's nothing finely ground, there's nothing finely milled about this compost. It's a little rough, there's lots of texture. So you can imagine how beautiful this is in your garden. It's going to hold a ton of airspace in your garden, keeping your garden soil really aerobic, providing tons of nutrients for your plants, but over and above the nutrient density of this awesome compost is the fact that because of the way we compost, we could actually use this compost as a biological inoculant, increasing not only biological diversity, but actually maintaining super high populations of those species. That is the key to nutrient cycling in our annual vegetable systems. Don't assume that there's a one-size-fits-all set of solutions for building a resilient property. Whether you're urban or rural, the resilient building strategies and tools that you employ must be contextual to your particular situation. There is no such thing as a universal action template or set of strategies that applies to every single property. A mistake a lot of folks make is thinking that all tools apply to every situation. Listen, I get it. I know that when you're a beginner, what you really crave is someone to just tell you exactly what to do, to give you a template that you can follow to guarantee your success. Nobody really likes to make mistakes, and so the tendency is then to just go out there and copy whatever someone else is doing. Whether that's on the internet or in your own community, the truth is that when it comes to building your resilient property, there are absolutely no shortcuts to success, and it can seem overwhelming if you don't know where to start. The only way, honestly, to get it right is to go through a systematic process to uncover the true potential of your property, understanding its embedded patterns, energy flows, resources, opportunities, strengths, and weaknesses, and then go ahead and make mindful, impactful decisions on which strategies and tools are appropriate to your property. And this is where things really start to shift towards successfully crafting resilient systems. There's a lot of noise on the internet right now regarding sustainability, and although much of it is going to be super interesting and useful, there's so much information out there that it can seem mind-numbingly overwhelming. How do you know where to begin or even where to end? It makes taking practical action really challenging. The bottom line is that information does not necessarily equal actual experience or expertise. So if you're relying on scattered information, you're actually building your dreams on a really weak foundation. So that's exactly why we created the Verge Permaculture Design course. It's really a practical solutions-based and organized way to learn everything you need to know about permaculture. We've gathered a group of expert instructors who cover all aspects of permaculture. The best part, our instructors actually have a combined experience of over 400 years, even though permaculture itself is only 45 years old. Any of those questions you have about your specific property, you'll be able to ask our panel of experts. A comprehensive curriculum, a practical, systematic approach, and the support, experience, and wisdom you need to know you're making the right decisions for your property make our PDC, in my personal opinion, the best on the planet. In addition, we offer advanced training opportunities to take you beyond the scope of this course. We created this to be your first foundational step into life as a permaculturist. Through the Verge live online PDCs, you'll find the answers that you've been looking for and the tools you need to go out and make a difference, and a community of like-minded mentors and friends to support you every step of the way. If this sounds like the environment you'd like to learn in, sign up for our fall PDC waitlist. The link will be in the description, and we hope to see you there.